Lord Lamont, thank you so much for joining us. You are also special envoy to Iran. Give me a sense of what your take on President Rouhani is.
Well, President Rouhani was quite outspoken during the election campaign, not just about getting trade and investment into Iran, but also about improving relations with the outside world. And he specifically mentioned Saudi Arabia. And there is no need for this tremendous enmity between the two. I felt it was sad, really, that President Trump could not even acknowledge when he was in Saudi Arabia what President Rouhani had said. Do we really believe the only way to treat Iran is just to be unremittingly hostile, and even when someone moves a bit towards your point of view, not even to recognize that and not respond in any positive way at all? And you know, when no attention is paid to the insecurity of Iran, a country that has been invaded by its Arab neighbor in the past, and yet the West goes on pouring arms to the enemies of Iran. We've got to look at this with a little bit more understanding of the Iranian position.
Lord Lamont, what do you think President Rouhani will focus on, and how will he take the extremely belligerent comments from President Trump over the weekend in Riyadh?
Well, I think he will, and we will see whether I'm right or wrong in a few hours, but I think he will respond in a very cautious way, as Zarif, the foreign minister, responded in a cautious way. I think they will feel their way very gradually through this. Rouhani has said that he wants to get the remaining non-nuclear sanctions lifted. That means he's got to have either direct negotiations with Europe to get further sanctions lifted, or with the United States. It's a difficult task for him, but he has made this an explicit ambition that he will try to do that. I imagine that there will be backdoor talks about security as well, about Syria, things like that, where the Iranians want a political solution.
Lord Lamont, wonderful to have you with us this morning. I know you don't go back to 1501 and the beginning of Shiism within the state of Iran as a formal state government. How great is that gulf right now from where you sit in your study, the distance between the Sunnis and the Shia?
Well, I think an important point, I do go back to 1501. I know exactly what you're talking about, and the time of Shah Abbas in the 16th century, although there was Shiism in Iran before that, actually, I may say. I think one of the points one ought to remember about Shiism is that it is much more flexible, much more pragmatic, and much more liable to interpretation in the context of the times than is the Wahhabism of Saudi Arabia. And most of the terrorism that the West suffers from comes from Wahhabism, from ISIL and Al-Qaeda.
Lord Lamont, we're just seeing President Trump going out of the steps or walking down the steps of Air Force One with his wife, Melania Trump, and they're waving. They will be greeted in just a couple of seconds by the President of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his wife. I wonder, Tom, reading between the lines, what Benjamin Netanyahu will actually ask the President. This is, again, his second leg in the first foreign trip of President Trump, Tom.
Just a second leg. You really wonder where we're going to be Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday as well, Francine. Again, an exhausting 8- and 9-day trip with a backdrop in Washington. But what really strikes me, and I'm glad that we've been speaking of Iran, is that seems to be the centerpiece between a fractious Sunni world and an ever more fractious Israel. Behind the hugging and the greeting, and of course with Mr. Netanyahu visiting at the White House, is the idea of a lot of sensitivities within this triangle of Sunnis, Israel, and the Shias.
Yeah, Lord Lamont, if you look at President Trump and what his visit in Israel will bring, how careful does he have to tread? Will he try not to upset Iran even more than he has this weekend, or does he not care?
I think he doesn't care at all, and I think this is frankly a bit of a mistake, because they follow his words extremely closely. What I think President Trump is trying to do is to solidify the alliance between the Sunni Arabs and Israel, and they're getting closer and closer against Iran. And I think this is quite a dangerous policy in its way. Now, look, I'm not saying you shouldn't be cautious about Iran. I'm not saying you shouldn't watch them like hawks. But I think if they are taking a more constructive approach, you ought in some way to respond, in some way to show that you are listening to them.
So how do you strike that balance? If you were to brief President Trump right now, how would you brief him?
Well, I think you ought to... he ought to tell the Iranians that he is aware of their own security anxieties, that the West is not out to change the political system of Iran, for example, that it's not going to have the pursuit of regime change as an objective, that we want to have good relations, it's up to them how they run their country.